welcome to the VideoGamer Podcast. I am joined with Dan Nanni, who is I guess like right now you can call yourself a veteran game developer, right?
I guess so. About this point, it's like, what is it, 25 years into it?
What do
So,
you think is
yeah.
the like barometer there? Like, when do you go from game developer to veteran game developer? Because isn't the
You know,
average for like a game developer lasts like 6, 7 years in the industry?
well, I was gonna say, like, I know when I first started, when I was in college, I wound up finding an instructor who had worked in the video game industry. I latched onto him so hard because he was the only person I had that had actual experience. And he was telling me at that point, look, if you can make it beyond 5 years, you're considered like a veteran at this point, right? And it quickly became knowledge. Like when my first paid industry job,
Hmm.
within a year, I was one of the oldest. I started out as an artist at that company, and I had been there perhaps the longest after a year. I was only like, I don't know,
Jeez.
22, 23 years old at that point. So it was weird to be like, oh, this is the person you go to ask questions to because he's been here longest and has the most knowledge. And I'm sitting here like, I don't know what I'm doing still.
I guess that kind of like that turnover rate kind of slows down now that as an industry, instead of taking like a year to 2 years to make a game, it now takes about 7 to 8 years to make a game. Or like
Yeah,
4 to 8.
yeah. Back then, it was also a lot of like 1 year turnaround.
Mm,
When we first when I first joined the industry, 1 year was common. Every
mm,
year you would drop something, drop something, drop something. But the games have gotten bigger and more elaborate. Back then we can make a game normally with 20 to 40 people.
mm.
Now 20 to 40 people is considered like an indie studio.
Yeah.
It's make a double A game maybe, but you can't make the style of games that blockbuster style.
Mm.
Too many people.
Well, I guess just like summarizing your whole career, you've worked on Elder Scrolls, you've worked on Battlefield, you've worked on Star Wars, you've worked on Fallout. You've kind of been I mean, you went from Elder Scrolls spin-off, not made at Bethesda, to actually working at Bethesda on like Starfield and Fallout,
Yeah,
which is a really a really fun like full circle kind of moment.
I
Um,
was.
but you've worked in quite a lot of places on quite a lot of franchises, and I guess first thing I want to ask you is how the hell did you get started?
Oh, so okay, how I got started was I went to college actually thinking I was going to go into maybe medical and chemistry was my
Quite
focus.
different.
Very different. I quickly realized I didn't want to do that. I went into computer science because I loved, this is like when the internet was taking off. I
Mm,
loved computers. I loved working on them in my spare time. I want to know more about them. Thought computer science would be cool. Realized I don't want to be staring at just text on my screen all day long. I wanted something else a little bit more visual. Eventually, it moved me into art, and it was a school in Phoenix. The Art Institute of Phoenix was offering a new program called Game Art and Design, and I'm a jack of all trades style of person, so I always
mm,
dabbled in art, and I was like, "What the heck? Let's try this out." I got my bachelor's in art, focused in on environment art, prop design, and I got an internship while I was there as well as a design intern for Rainbow Studios, and that was my
mm.
first break-in. Was working with the guys at Rainbow Studios on ATV Off-Road Fury, Motocross Madness, Splashdown, Star Wars Racer Revenge. I got my hands dirty in the video game industry there as a designer, but that was all unpaid back in the days and I was going to school at the same time. And then my first job was as an artist because I had an art degree.
Mm.
I got to work on Robotech and Spy versus Spy and a couple of other,
I really loved that Spy
yeah.
versus Spy game on
I don't.
Xbox.
Oh man, that was like that. Man, I can't. This is the way that you used to work. You wore so many hats on that game. I worked on puzzle mechanics as it related to animations and effects. So
Hmm.
every time the spy got squashed by something, I was doing the animation. I wasn't trained in animation. I was not trained in visual effects.
I think that's the first game actually that I noticed like squash and stretch in
Yeah.
3D. Like that
And that was
looked
just
right.
fun. I was messing around with it and I was like squash, smash. And it was like, this is the greatest thing. But I was just learning it on the fly because there just wasn't somebody who could do it. And I had an art degree, so I guess I could figure it out. And that's what I did.
Yeah, it's kind of like you said, like 20, 30 people, like people have to wear like multiple hats, right?
Yeah.
You can't really make a game. You couldn't really make a game back then where everyone is just like one lane only.
Yeah, totally. And that was like 20 to 30 people on multiple projects,
Hmm.
right? We were bouncing around between a couple of different things.
So if
So
we take Spy versus Spy as an example. Like, how
Sure.
many people would you say like back then were working on just that game and no other game?
Um, so that was when I was working at Vicious Cycle Software. We were
Mm,
working on. I got hired. I hired there for a different project. It got canned like within a couple of weeks of me starting,
mm,
and we moved on to Robotech. But I want to say that I only worked at Vicious Cycle for about a year and a half, and I worked on Robotech, Dinotopia, Sunstone Odyssey, which is
I've
about
never heard of that before.
it was a children's book that we were making a game for, and Spy versus Spy. So that's three games in a year and a half, and
Mm,
I think there was overlap. I think we were doing them simultaneously.
mm,
Um, I'm trying to remember because that's like almost 25 years ago now. So the number of people I can't tell you, but it wasn't a big studio.
mm,
We had a handful of people. Like the art department was like five people at points, maybe bigger. I guess I don't remember. But we were just bouncing around between different projects at times, doing different things depending on what the needs were. My focus was mostly on Robotech, but it was also jumping into Spy versus Spy because it was help that was needed for that one. So I can't really tell you what the number was because we just kept on going in and out.
Now that you've also like, you're still in the games industry, you've
Yeah,
spent a considerable amount of time in like modern game studios. So let's take like Bethesda, for example, a company that has like 500 employees or something working across multiple titles. Like, do you like do you ever miss kind of that era where like in a year and a half you are getting out three things? Because
yeah,
like I don't know, it seems like a very different work process than it is
it
today.
is. It is. I'm not a fan of super long projects.
Mm,
I think I would. It's a boredom thing. It's a questioning thing. It's really easy to kind of look at the game that you're working on, and after some time, think it's not good enough,
mm,
and it forces you to question whether or not this is the right thing to do, and you overanalyze and you just dig way too deep into it because you're too close to the project.
mm,
And so the longer you are on the project, the closer you are to it, and the worse it looks.
mm,
And so the need of outside perspective and validation is really necessary, which is why I just would rather kick it out the door and let players play it to after a certain point.
mm.
Um, but yeah, I would prefer shorter dev cycles. I think 2 to 3 years is a good development cycle. It's just enough to get tired of it, but also enough time to make it more quality. And
Yeah.
if you know what you're doing and you have good targets and you have good goals, you can make a good game in 2 to 3 years.
So like Starfield, for example, that's a game that I believe was in development before you started at
Yes.
Bethesda. I
Yeah.
believe was still in development after you left Bethesda.
Correct. Correct.
Um,
Long,
so
long game.
yeah, long game. Like I think a lot of people have been like, oh, like Elder Scrolls, we had like Arena, Daggerfall, all those spin-offs, Morrowind, then Oblivion 2 years later, then Fallout 3,
Yeah.
then Skyrim, and then Fallout 4, then massive wait
Yeah.
for Starfield. And obviously that's because of a lot of development stuff like COVID hit, massive engine update for like the entire future of Bethesda. Um, but it seems like now we've gone through a period where there are games that like it feels like they're in development forever. And we've had that before, like Duke Nukem Forever, 13 years.
Sure. I mean, even like
Famously.
I worked at Gorilla when Horizon Zero Dawn was started up.
Mm.
Um,
Is that like 2010, 2011?
oh, so I was at Gorilla between 2009 and 2011, and I
Mm.
want to say right around 2010 is when it was pitched.
Yeah.
And then it was like started off and they were kicking it in. It was a very small team. It was just like
Mm.
more of like a concept than anything else at that time. But yeah, if you add in all of the time from the beginning until it shipped, it's a good amount of time. But it's what happens when you have to make an engine that you don't have yet, when you
Yeah.
have to make a game that you've never built yet.
Yeah,
But then there's
because
also player expectation. That's the big thing. I think
mm,
you can't launch a $70 game as a major first party title for a Microsoft or a Sony and have it be anything less than spectacular.
mm.
And so it takes time. Those are the type of games that sell game consoles. Then that's what you have to hit hard with those.
Well, if we jumping off that, let's shift to Killzone, which you worked on. You worked on
Mhm.
Killzone 3 and then Killzone Shadowfall.
Yeah.
Those are obviously major first party releases for PlayStation. Like one of them was a launch title for the PS4.
Hmm.
So like console at that point, console sales are literally banking on that title
Yeah.
as like one of the major releases. Is that how stressful is that to be in a position where you're working on something that, it's not just the future of like Gorilla, it's also the future of the platform holder that um like
You
owns
know,
Gorilla.
as you start taking more and more responsibility
Mm,
in studios, the more stress you feel for that. Where I was, my position at that point, I was an individual contributor. I was building out maps. I was working
mm,
on the multiplayer thing. So I didn't feel the stress nearly as much, but you could feel that there was stress around. It
mm,
was always, especially at that point, there was always questions of how do you make this the next Call of Duty game?
mm,
How do you compete against Call of Duty because we were working on the multiplayer side. Um, my answer was like, well, the first thing you do is you don't compete against Call of Duty. That's not what we're here to do, right? Like that's not the whole point of this. If you are, we're making the wrong game to compete against Call of Duty because that's just not what we were building.
yeah.
But
I mean, Ubisoft have just learned that lesson, haven't they?
yeah, I mean, it's people forget that when you make statements like that as well,
Mm,
you forget about everything that they've done up until that point. Everybody right now will be like, "Hey, so how do you make the next Elden Ring?" And the
mm.
question is like, "Well, how far back do you want to start?" Because they started out with Kingsfield back in PlayStation,
Yeah,
so there's
1991.
a couple of decades worth of learned lessons that they've had. So to hit a success like that takes success and failure and time.
Mm.
Um,
I mean, you've
you
also got
forget
to
about
have
those
the
things.
decade and a half of like positive like releases and like
Correct.
reputation that gamers have because
And not only
Elden
that, but
Ring
like the
wouldn't have.
building of the game engine and the
Yeah.
content that you have from a previous game that you can bring up and like you don't have to rebuild various meta
Mhm.
systems like or back end or whatever it is to support it. Like there is stuff there for you to kind of build off of when you have nothing to build from. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. So to hit that and be like, what can you do to make this compete immediately? It's a very hard question to answer. It's mostly time, experience, failure, successes, and learning your lessons. And by the way, I hope you have enough money in the bank to ride it out for some time, because obviously in this day and age, that's the hard one.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one aspect of modern game development that is terrifying, right? If you're a new
Yeah,
studio starting out, uh, before you had 2 years to make a game, and now you've got five or six that you have to fund. Seems
you have to
like if you don't
pull
have a
through.
publisher, you're pretty screwed.
Yeah, and right now publishers don't want to spend money on wisely, rightly so, right? They don't. There's a lot of risk to be taken right now. The value of money is higher,
Hmm.
interest rates are higher, all of that is higher. So people don't want to lend as much, and so you have to kind of prove that what you're doing is going to be successful before people are willing to invest. Versus pre-COVID or right when COVID hit, man, money was flying around. They were just investing in whatever idea might be out there. Um, but we're not there anymore. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
you gotta make a
layoffs everywhere and
yep.
projects canceled.
It's
Uh,
too much of it. I've been through this before in the industry. It always ebbs and flows, right? You start
yeah.
seeing like LucasArts was always a prime example of like they're going to take it all in house and make everything Star Wars, everything on their own. And then they realize within a couple of years it's hard to build that internally without a studio that was already
Mm.
successful or has a working process. So then they open it up and it's all third party built. And then they see all the success there and they're like, well, let me bring it back in. And so you see studios lay off and you see, new studios form. And that was common in the industry to kind of hit those ebbs and flows. But this one is ebbing a lot more than it has in the past, at least in my experience. It's a little
Well,
bit
let's
different.
go let's go all the way back. Let's talk about Elden Ring? No. Let's talk about Elder Scrolls Travels Shadowkeep.
Oh man, yeah.
Which God, how old is that now? Let's see,
Oh,
2004,
that
so
was
21
2004,
years?
2005. We're going on 20 years on that one. That's
Yeah.
going way back. Yeah.
Kind of like one of because for a series as big as Elder Scrolls, they shouldn't really be games that are like go under the radar. But
Yeah.
like that Travel series, which I believe there was one either before or just after Shadowkeep, and then there was the Oblivion PSP thing that was also going to be a Travels game that was scrapped, although there were builds of it out in the world. But you worked on Shadowkeep for the N Gauge, which
The
is
Engage. Oh,
The failed Nokia phone slash
that was a
3D
stint.
3D handheld that I believe
Oh,
sold
3D, you
only.
can say so loosely. 3D is such a loose term right there.
It's like pseudo 3D, right? It's like,
It wasn't even, there was no hardware for 3D. It was all software rendered 3D. So it was as 3D as you can make it with some hamsters in there.
well, let's just say Shadowkey then. Like, it's one of the most stable looking 3D games on the platform. I think that and the Tony Hawk game that released on it.
Yeah.
Um, that was a fucking hog of a machine, right?
Man, it was a beast. That we nicknamed it like the taco, right? Because the way the first one came out and you had to like talk on it like a taco
It's
was so
also
weird. But
insane
then
that there are two of them, by the way.
of what engages?
Yeah, that there's two
No,
versions.
well, there's more than two versions, and that's what
What
we
do you mean
found out
there's
the
more than
hard way
two?
on. Oh boy, this is okay. So this was the fun part. Working on an Elder Scrolls game was hard enough for the Engage. It was also the only, up until this point, still the only multiplayer Elder Scrolls game
Yep,
that
two to
ever
four
launched.
players, right?
And I used to tie when I was working at Bethesda. I would joke with Todd. I'd be like, in the studio, only you and I have ever worked on a multiplayer Elder Scrolls game that has shipped still, right? It's just like a running joke. But at the end of development of that, when we were actually, printing out the cartridges and getting everything on there and going through the final test processes, we got a failure. And it was a hard fail. It was,
Mm.
we can't ship the game like this. Like, what's wrong? Well, apparently there are multiple versions of the N-Gauges that they have launched and released. Even though they looked the same, they made the newer one that looked a little bit more like a game system, but then the older Taco version of it, there were multiple versions of them that had different hardware specs in them. And the original one also had a file limitation.
Mm.
We exceeded the file limit. The amount of files that we had in the game in order to, ship it was too big for the original version of the N-Gage's capacity. And so it couldn't launch it because it couldn't
And that's
process
as you
enough
have finished the
files.
game.
We're done. We're finished. We're like gold mastering effectively on this, right? We're trying to get it out there and get it, into a distributor and get it all set up to print out on cartridge. And yep, found out that was a hard fail too. And the problem was that, look, maybe 50,000 people owned N-Gages in the world. Heck if I know. But there couldn't have been more than 100 people that had owned the original version of it. Maybe I'm talking a little like, big numbers, small numbers.
Yeah.
But the point is, it was such a small number of people that would have had this. But that was a requirement. It had to have shipped on it. And so at the very end, we had to do something where we compressed all the files into one bigger package.
Mm.
So when the game played, it had to uncompress those packages. And
Is it a .pack file?
maybe it was a .pack file. I don't remember. It's been so long. But I do know that it wound up killing at least 5 frames per second in order for that to happen. So the bad frame rate that we already had because there was no true 3D hardware on it, got hit with another massive hit because we had to compress all the files into it. And that was the only solution that we had because it was done. Like, I think we wound up spending, I think to solve this, we did like 32 hours straight of work.
Mm.
Because I remember we were just making constant coffee runs throughout the day and just rushing. And we were all hands on deck for like 32 hours. And we collapsed at the end of it just to get it all to ship on time.
That's absolutely insane. Like, I guess like the developer documentation, like for the Engage, was they just like fuck all of it, or did they just fail to mention this?
Well, I think this is just a part of like whenever you're building a new product, in this case, it was a new console,
Mm.
you're learning everything as you go. There is no process in place for it. Like there really wasn't. I mean, you had a Game Boy out there that you can say, oh, look at that. There's a mobile game device. But this is a Game Boy that was also a telephone that was being developed by a company that was known for making telephones. So they're dabbling in it. They're trying to figure it out. So their processes aren't in place. So communication isn't in place when they don't have a process in place and you're figuring things out. So, and I don't blame them for any of that. That's just making a new product and you're figuring things out as you go. But yeah, it would be cool if there was a lot of documentation, but the game industry isn't very well known for keeping its, history tight.
So I guess how the hell did you get involved in Shadowkeep? And it's not the only Engage game you made either.
No, this is another one of those where I worked at the company for a certain amount of time and released many games because that's just how we rolled back then. But no, I wound up I wanted to become a designer. I knew I was an artist at that time. Before that, that's where Vicious Cycle. But I really wanted to get in design, and they offered me a designer position at was it TKO Software. They had two studios. One was in Santa Cruz, and one was in Dallas. And I went to the one in Dallas to work on the N-Gage games. It was also a nice bump in salary back then, where I was trying to get married, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can afford to get married right now, so let's do this." And uh, so that's how I joined the studio. And at that point, we were trying to make also another game. I can't remember what it was, but it was going to be a game that we owned. It was our IP that we were trying to do. It was for the PC, which is what we wanted to do back then. That didn't pan out, so this was to kind of pay the bills. And Engage paid pretty well to because they wanted to get their system out there. And so there was a bunch of titles that we had. We had a Leisure Suit Larry game. We had that. I think we worked on a Call of Duty game, the Elder Scrolls game, obviously. There might have been something else too. I can't remember. And then a couple of games that we were working on internally as well. And so it was just, we need bodies. Dan, you can script, right? I'm like, well, I just learned how to. I was an artist previously. I just learned how to script write like last week. And I guess it was like an investor who was coming through, and they introduced me. This is Dan. He's our lead scripter. I'm sitting there with my eyes wide open. I'm like, by lead scripter, do you mean only scripter? Because if that's the case, then yeah, I guess that's true too. And that's just how I learned. I just jumped in, and I guess I became the lead scripter, and I just made the game work. Myself and a couple of programmers, we were just sitting there all day long trying to build out systems and just make it all function.
And what was the I guess the vibe on working on an engage game? Like, did people hate that thing, or was it exciting for the time? Because
Yeah. It was a love-hate relationship, right? Like you could sit there and be like, yeah, we're getting paid to make video games. This is awesome.
hmm,
But man, it would be so cool if we weren't working on the N-Gage because it's not that you didn't want to make video games, but you were just hamstrung. It was like developing with one arm behind your back. You can only type on the keyboard with one hand.
hmm.
No matter how hard you tried, you were just trying to bypass the limitations constantly. But there's a beauty in those limitations that force you to think very creatively when you're forced inside of a box.
Hmm.
And I think that's where you find really interesting, fun designs sometimes that you don't mean to stumble across. They just kind of naturally evolve because you have to find a solution. You know what your limitations are, but at the same time, you're trying to be creative because you're trying to have pride in the work that you're doing. And when you get excitement, you get passion, and you get pride all mixed together, and you know what your limitations are, you come to successes that you might not have stumbled across before. So even with Shadowkey, it wasn't like it was the penultimate game that I've ever launched in my career, but there's a lot of pride in the work that we did on that
I
game.
mean, you
It was
got
a
an open
lot
world
of
game
hours.
on an engage.
Yeah, it wasn't just the open world. It was like multiplayer. These scripts that I had to do to get the final boss to travel throughout the map and
Hmm.
be able to like follow individual players. It was ridiculous. There was a final door I remember that took into account all of the actions that the player had to do throughout the entire game experience. And based off of what they did when they opened the door, it spawned a specific object. That script was 700 lines, I remember, just to make the door open and spawn in the right object. It was too complicated, and I was so proud of it because it was so much effort and so much work, right? And I can never put that on my resume. Number one, because it's scripting, and nobody's gonna ever like look at. They're never gonna look at that in my portfolio. It was under NDA and everything. But at the same time, like I think people would look at that and be like, "Why did you do all of that work for a stupid door and a reward at the end?" I'm like, because nobody else would, and this is the only way
I
it was gonna
mean, that's like the spirit of Elder Scrolls, right? As well, which I think you guys, again, like for an engage, like a lot of it's a platform that nobody, I guess, now really cares about. But at the
go.
time, like you guys put so much care and thought into bringing the actual Elder Scrolls experience, which I guess, like technically, was the last gen Elder Scrolls experience, right? It was the Daggerfall arena style instead of the
Yeah,
Morrowind style.
yeah, it was definitely like that dungeon crawler back in the day style of
Yeah.
crawler. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that people just don't realize whenever you play a game, and if it's not perfect, it doesn't
Mm.
mean that love was not poured into it. It's sometimes just a matter of situation, time, budget, or a lot of times it's like just not enough hands on deck. You can only make so many decisions and do so many things with the two hands that you have and the time given to you.
I mean, some of my favorite games are technically like sevens out of tens, but like that's where games are really interesting. Like for
Yeah.
me, I kind of struggle with some games like we talked about Horizon earlier.
Mhm.
What do you mean upgrade to Zoom Pro? What the fuck?
Did that just pop up for you?
Yeah. Like games like Horizon Zero Dawn or like God of War Ragnarok, when I play them, I can kind of feel that all the edges have kind of like been sanded down. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's like they're great games. They just also feel like a little less interesting, that there's no like rough edges to kind of be like, oh, that's really interesting. That's really fun. That's an idea
Yeah.
that is so unique, but ne doesn't quite pan out.
I think that's just you're describing what like the AAA industry is.
Mm,
It's creating a really it's trying to, not always, right? But it's trying to create a very polished product, right?
mm,
It needs to feel worth. Part of it is, $70 for these games. Now, granted, if you could break it down into time, you're like, you're actually getting a pretty good value for
mm,
$70 when you break it down hourly, right? Um, and when you look at how many devs were involved in making, these are not cheap games to make. But what AAA offers is a little less risk because of the cost.
mm,
And as you see, like what we're experiencing right now in the industry with all the layoffs, that risk is high.
mm,
You strike out once and it could be enough to take everything out. And taking everything out means there's hundreds of developers who are no longer employed, aren't paying their bills, companies no longer around. So it is a do or die situation. It is a go big or go home style of situation. But when we say go big, it's on the budget. It
mm.
doesn't necessarily mean it's in the risk taking because somebody wants to see a return on that just due to how expensive these games are. And that's where like double A is kind of like in the rise, right? It's smaller dev studios that aren't going with big budget, but there is more of an appetite for some risk taking. There's a little bit more of an appetite to try something else out there because you can strike gold with this. And if you fail, it's a little less dangerous. Not necessarily true everywhere, but it's a little less dangerous than the AAA budget. Um, so yeah, you're seeing a lot more of that polish in AAA, but again, it's the player expectation that kind of drives some of that polish. Nobody wants to spend their hard-earned dollars on something that is not polished, or at
Mm.
least let's just say that that is the interpretation from the business angle of it.
And it's kind of, how do you feel about kind of like we're getting a resurgence of double A, it seems like
Yeah.
as we talk now, like Expedition 33
Yep.
has like I think it's like a week old.
Hmm.
And people are really, really vibing with that. Like again, that's a game that is awesome, but has quite a few rough edges.
Yeah.
But it's cheaper and a lot more people have like been able to get into it.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, maybe it's because like double A releases now, they're $50, whereas before they used to be $30. But
Yeah.
you know, it is
Inflation free, right?
yeah, it is a cheaper way to get into games, and also you got Game Pass and stuff like that, which is
Yeah.
its
Double
whole
A used to
own
be like
bag of worms.
it used to be such a negative connotation back in the, it was what we would call like bargain bin gaming, right?
Mm,
If you were working on a title in the early 2000s that was going to launch for 30 or $40 because that was still on console, right? There wasn't a Steam yet available where you can get access to all these indie games. These are still professionally developed games by studios that had publishers that forward them some money and payment to make a game for them. If you got to work on a game that was going to be a bargain bin game effectively, it wasn't a good feeling. It
mm,
was, you knew that it came with a very short timeline, very like I don't want to say low quality design, but nobody was going to take a risk. This was just to align itself potentially with a cartoon that was releasing or a movie that was going to launch. It was going to be like almost like supplemental marketing where they can say this movie has launched and check out the game. That's you can get it alongside it. If it was a big budget thing like a Star Wars thing, you would get the bigger budget, right?
mm.
You can make a bigger game effectively, like the Battlefronts back in the day. But if it was, I don't know, Sunstone Odyssey that was aligned with books at that
Mm.
point, it wasn't necessarily going to be a high budget game. Perhaps it was going to be a little bit cheaper. So you were making something that you would know isn't going to be too totally high quality. Now though, double A is not that.
Yeah.
Now double A is like it's almost like the restaurant industry, right? Like before it was like, oh, cheesecake factories and all these big restaurants. And then suddenly somebody said, you know what? I'm going to make a restaurant just on grilled cheese sandwiches, nothing else. I'm not going to serve anything but grilled cheese sandwiches. And it can take off and it can succeed. And the video game industry is now that. Double A is about focus. It's about making something really good. It could be a little rough around the edges and unpolished, but it's a concept that you have that you want to execute that a publisher would not be willing to invest their money in. But it's okay. I don't need all of that money or I don't need all of that time. I can just focus on something really focused and good in a smaller dosage way. And players want that. And it's fantastic. I love it. It gets us to be a little bit more creative and not think about everything has to be Cheesecake Factory, massive menus worth of offerings.
So Expedition 33 is a really good grilled cheese, is what I'm getting.
Right, exactly, right? I mean, survival games are a great example of that as well. Like get into like the Valheims or
Yeah.
even Enshrouded, right? It's just about focus and finding something you like and doing it well.
RuneScape Legends, I believe
Yep.
that's
Yep.
another double A title that's recently taken off. Yeah, I think yeah, most of the like the big PC releases nowadays they're either like indie games or double A games. It's really, really refreshing to see actually. I think the
I
last like
agree.
10 years of they've they've been a little rough for like smaller experiences.
I also love the challenge that it presents. Not the challenge in like the challenge in making it, but
Mm,
it forces people who've been doing this for so long to be challenged on what they thought was correct.
mm,
And to say like all these things that you learned that you said were this is the right way to do it and this is the only way to make it. We're being completely challenged by a new generation of developers who are like, no, there's another way to do it.
mm.
And we can make it just as well, if not better, than it was done before with less time and less budget and less experience. And so it forces everybody to reevaluate thoughts that they had were gold standard. Everybody uses that term like, this is the gold standard. This is what you do. There's no gold standard in creativity. It keeps on changing. So we're being forced to change and adapt. And I love that personally because that's why I'm in the game industry. I want to learn more constantly.
Okay, I would like to talk about Star Wars Battlefront, which you worked on back in what's that, 2005? Star
That
Wars
was after
Battlefront 2?
TKO. Yeah, that was 2005 to 2007.
Um, so I guess like prequel era Star Wars, very
Yeah.
big, also very divisive. Um, but I think by the time you're working on Battlefront 3, Revenge of the Sith is out or is coming out. Coming out?
Yes. Oh God, I'm trying to remember if Battlefront 2 launched with Revenge of the No, it was that's the third one, right? The third
Yeah.
one. I think we launched with the second one for
Okay.
Battlefront 2. And
Because I
then
think
Battlefront 3, I believe, was supposed to go with Revenge of the Sith. Man, I can't remember. It's been so long. Um, trying to remember where I was at those times.
I think about Revenge of the Sith comes out in 2005. And I think Battlefront 2 actually releases before and has like it's got the Revenge of the Sith story in it.
Yes. God, yes, you're right.
It's a very like Star Wars heavy like couple of years, isn't it?
It really is. And the thing is, like, I had moved around so much in my life, and then I got married in the middle of it. So I'm like, I have to associate a location to remember things these days because it's so disjointed. The timeline is so crazy.
So for someone like me who uh grew up on Battlefront, like Battlefront 2 is like one of the most played games of my childhood.
Yeah.
And like obviously like you weren't a child on the playground at the time because you were making the game, but it is the game that like everyone played. Like everyone would go over to someone's house to play Battlefront 2.
That's
Um
awesome to hear. I love that so much. I love that so much.
like
That's why I'm here.
it as a kid, it felt like there was no bigger game than Battlefront 2.
That's cool. I love
Um
that.
so I guess like from your perspective, working on a game, like did you at any point real like think that this would be a game that is going to be fundamental to millions and millions of people's childhoods?
So that's a big statement. I appreciate it. But okay, so I'll tell you like one of the big things that was an inspiration for me like, to
Hmm.
get into the game industry and why I wanted it. Video games was a thing that like got me and my dad together.
Hmm.
Like I remember him buying the Atari 2600. He said for me, but I knew it was also for him. Whenever we travel anywhere, we would find the nearby arcade and just toss in all of our quarters playing at an arcade. So it was a bonding thing with my father and I. And so when I got in the industry, I was like, I want bonding between parents and their children and best friends. I want that. I grew up with my best friend playing so many video games with him, and I just wanted more of that and to share that. So the point I knew that Battlefront 2 was going to potentially do that, I think, was at Comic Con when we launched our game. It was presented at Comic Con, and it was when the movies were also hitting. And I believe it was Spielberg who was on stage presenting the new movie and then talking about the game in tandem with it and mentioning that he played the game with his daughter.
Hmm.
There was some context there and gushing about how fun it was. And I just sat there and I was like, oh, Spielberg's talking about the game that we made with his daughter. It had nothing to do about like just him playing the video game. It was about him playing with family
Hmm.
and bonding over it. And that's when it hit home. That's when it hit home that the hard work that you put into it and all the decisions that you make were bringing people together. And that's why I got into the industry, was to get people to come together and enjoy their time together and have fun, forget about the craziness of life and all the difficulties it brings, and just bond. And so
Hmm.
that was it. That was that moment where I was like, "Yep, I'm still here for a reason. I love this."
And when it comes to like designing Battlefront, like Battlefront is such like a unique like style of game. Uh like it's massive, it's objective based. I guess like it made sense that in the future DICE would do it because it is pretty much Star Wars Battlefield, but
Yeah,
or at least Star Wars
it
classic
probably was.
Battlefield. And like it's as a kid, like it feels like it felt like the like smartest like shooter around, right? Because like you had things to do, but it was also Star Wars.
Yeah, you
Um,
play with your friends, play by yourself. You got a story if you want to. You
there's
got
heroes versus
objectives. And,
villains.
yep.
That's also like again like something of the era of that era of game development is like chucking everything into a
Yes.
game. Like Battlefront has all the maps from Battlefront 1,
Yep.
a bunch of Battlefront 2 maps, like prequels, original trilogy. It's got space combat. It's
Yep.
got heroes versus villains. It's got like everything. Like it's the entire toy box, just
Yeah.
like chucked into one game. How the fuck did you guys do that?
Okay. Not only did how the fuck did we do it? Like
You did it in like
seriously,
2 years, right? Or less.
Battlefront 2 was 1 year project.
Yeah.
But Battlefront 1 was also a short time project. I started right at the end of Battlefront 1 when they were working on like some downloadable content for it, or it was just like a patch to it.
Oh,
So I got to start
was it the
on
Jabba's
that.
Palace map for
Man, I
Xbox?
don't remember. I don't remember. I remember.
I
I want
think
to
the
say I remember
Xbox
a
version
Jedi
had.
that had some like had
Is it Kit Fisto? Is it the green one?
maybe. I don't. It got it like it. This is like you're going back in
Listen,
like 20
listen,
years
man. I
ago.
think
I
it's
have
Kit Fisto.
hazy memory, but yeah, I just remember coming in and one of our animators was working on a Jedi,
Hmm.
and I was looking at this saying, "Man, I can't wait to dive right into Battlefront 2 and start making that." Right. But yeah, there was just a lot of time, a lot of work, but it was also the first time I worked at a job where I wasn't crunching all of the time. The
Hmm.
previous two places I worked at, I was nonstop crunching. Well, the place I was working on the Elder Scrolls game, it was 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, for months at a time at points. It was not good, which is one of the reasons why I had to move on, because I was literally killing myself trying to do that and get married
Hmm.
simultaneously. And so working at Pandemic, working on Battlefront games was not only did I get to work on something that I was excited about, I was a Star Wars geek and I finally got to work on a Star Wars game for a company that people knew about.
Were you a
Um,
prequels guy?
oh
Because
God.
I think like
I
two of them
mean,
two of them were out and they're the worst two of the prequels.
look, I'm an OG Star Wars person. That was my era. That's where I was born, right? But yeah, I got to work on stuff that I was really excited about and not kill myself doing
Hmm.
it. And we all did it in a year, which was amazing. It was a really great experience all around. It was probably one of the highlights of my industry experience. And to know that people played it and loved it and kept on. And people are still playing it today. You can still download it and play it. And it's amazing. It's so
Not
cool.
only not only are they still playing, they're still modding it.
I know. It's
Like
great.
it's insane. People
It
have
is.
so you worked on Star Wars Battlefront 3, which sadly was never released. I think people have said that it was like 95% completion. I don't know how true that is.
No, we never got to 95%. We had it was honestly we started working on it and then
Hmm.
negotiations just didn't take off. Again, it was the transition into
Into
to a new
Lucasfilm, right?
console. Well,
Sorry,
it was a new
LucasArts.
console that was coming out.
Hmm.
And when you move into a new console, it's not as easy as saying, let me just make a game for it. Just like I was doing it for the previous console. New consoles have new hardware, and new hardware come with new limitations, and you don't know exactly what you're working with until you work with it. When somebody says, I want you to be able to make another game for us in 1 year,
Hmm.
and you don't know what tools you're working with, you can't make an accurate prediction on whether or not you can hit it in time. And so I think negotiations stalled out because I think we wanted more time to work on it, and but obviously Lucas was also trying to align it with their own marketing beats,
Yeah.
and
And they
things
had
just
Force
didn't pan out.
Unleashed, and I believe their Indiana Jones game, like
Yep,
it took
yep.
too much money, so
We
they
were
scrapped
working on
that.
it. We were making some headway on it, and oh man, it was looking cool. We had some tech on it that was
You
pretty
had
fun.
you
Where
had missions that went from space to the
yep,
ground and then
yep,
back up.
yep, and
Um,
it was working really well. It was
yeah.
actually working really well because Battlefront 2, we had space missions and we had ground
Hmm.
missions, and we said, what's the evolution of this? I'm like, well, everybody was like, it's ground to space. It's
Yeah.
it's a big battlefield that is Star Wars all the time. And it was really cool. I think if we were given the time, we would have made something really special. But
How much more time do you think the team would have needed to bring it to like
I
the
mean,
level of quality they wanted?
probably good 2 years.
Hmm.
Simply because we just needed probably a year of understanding what the console was, what its limitations were, and all of its issues that we were going to have to work around that did no longer would have worked with the technology that we had used to build it on the previous generation system. We would have to probably do some engine updates because it was a proprietary engine that we were using. It was all internally made, and so they would have to catch up and say, "Oh, okay, well the new consoles are giving us this requirement that we need to work around. What changes do we need to make to support that?" So to be able to make a game while at the same time the engine is fundamentally being worked on is just a bad process.
Hmm.
So we probably would have needed like a year of just getting ourselves back up to speed. We would also have, you launch on a new console, nobody wants to see old generation visuals,
Yeah.
especially back then. The transition between consoles took very, very massive leaps in visual quality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at Halo 2 and then Halo 3, right?
Yeah, they're astounding. So you can't easily say, "Oh, I'm gonna give you, PS2 graphics on a PS3."
Mhm.
Nobody was gonna want that at that point. So you were gonna have to upres everything. So again, that's more time transitioning all that. So we wouldn't have been able to just port Battlefront One's worth of content into Battlefront 3. We would have had to have done work on upresing it and getting it more visually sophisticated. So we would just need time. It's just a matter of time. And this is the miscalculation that devs usually have or publishers do, where they say,
Mhm.
"Oh, just hire more people," because if you hire double the amount of people, you get double the amount of work, right? No, it never works.
Not including the months of onboarding and getting
Months of
everyone used to the
onboarding
tools.
process, just learning, and then also it just doesn't mathematically work. You don't get double the amount of output with double the amount of people. There's just work that can't be done in a doubled way. It's
Mhm.
still going to be this people kind of dogpiling onto a single system, and it can only go so much further with an additional body on it.
When it comes to Battlefront 3, have you seen like the leaked builds out there? Like
The
uh,
leaked builds, I think that was when it moved on to a different studio, right? That was
hmm.
the Time Splitter studio in the UK, wasn't it?
Free
Can't remember.
Radical? Yeah,
Free Radical, right? I
I think
think
so.
they took it and they did something else with it.
Hmm.
And so that was Lucas saying, "All right, well, they're going to move it to a different studio and let them kind of take a stab at it." So I did see some stuff a few years ago on what they were working on, but I remember looking at it and thinking, I don't think that had anything to do with what we were working on.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a leaked Wii build. I think there's actually like three leaked Wii builds, and then there's also a leaked 360 build. Were they working with your like tools? Like, did they get to start from where you guys were, or
I don't know about that. I know that internally, because it was a proprietary engine, we had at Pandemic a tools team that was working specifically on ensuring the engine was viable for all of the games we were working on.
hmm,
Pandemic was also a studio that worked on lots of projects
destroy
simultaneously.
all humans?
Destroy All Humans,
Yeah.
Mercenaries, Lord of the Rings, right? There was a bunch of games we were working on that engine. I don't think, and I could be wrong about this, but I'd be very suspect if Pandemic said, "Yeah, well, here, take our game engine and
Hmm.
use it for yourself as well." But there could have been a clause inside of. I don't know the business side of it, so I don't know if there was a clause that said, "Yeah, we also own all of the tech." They might
Hmm.
have owned all the content,
Yeah.
and because it was Star Wars content, you can take all the art assets you want to, but maybe anything technology driven would not have been transferable.
Hmm.
I'm not certain. I don't even know if they would have wanted that at Free Radical because, working with somebody else's engine when you're not familiar with it is never a good experience, especially if you don't have the tech guys there with you.
Yeah, it's not like, picking up someone's Unreal project and like
Correct.
continuing it in Unreal.
Yeah, it's like
It's
it's picking up anything that you've never worked with before, and there's no documentation on it
hmm.
anywhere in the internet. Like, good luck, have fun with our janky technology.
um I would like to talk about Lawbreakers.
Hmm. Oh boy, Lawbreakers.
So
Yeah,
Lawbreakers is a really interesting project
it is.
because as someone who's played it,
Yeah,
Lawbreakers was actually really good.
yeah, yeah. It was a good
But
game.
it was a good game that I think, with a couple months of like extra post launch and, seeing how it evolved over time,
Yeah.
it would have been something really great. Unfortunately, you guys did release at this like very similar time to
Oh
Overwatch.
God. It wasn't
Um
just Overwatch, man. It was
Battlebot,
PUBG. PUBG
PUBG,
was on its it was all the way up there. And then at that time too, Fortnite transitioned from its Save
into
the
a battle
World
royale.
into its Battle Royale, and that was going stratospheric, right?
Hmm.
And then it was Overwatch, and we're all just sitting there with, oh man, what have we just jumped into, right? Like this little tiny minnow and this barracuda and sharks everywhere around us. Oh,
I
God,
think
you
in
couldn't
Cliffy
make any waves.
B's memoir that he released a couple of years ago, I believe there's like a passage where he talks about like seeing Overwatch, and somebody at the studio says like, "We are so fucked."
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It was definitely, you learn a lot from that. You learn
mm,
that no matter how good of a game you have to watch for the market.
yeah.
You can easily get sunk. I wonder if it would be different now because of the way we've embraced secondary titles. Gamers are
Mm.
much more inclined to buy another game now, especially if it's priced correctly.
Yeah, I
Versus,
think the very specific thing about Overwatch as well is like it was it was a game that like you paid like a full price for, and it had an addictive hook, right, with
yeah,
its loot boxes. Like everyone wanted to unlock loot boxes, and it was,
yeah,
even though it was a time where gamers were like, "Oh, fuck loot boxes," they were like, "Oh, but not an Overwatch. Like we like
right,
those."
yes,
Um, and like it was so hard to like push through that kind of
yep.
like, I guess, like bubble of like that game and then PUBG and then Fortnite. Like nothing is getting through those three games.
Yeah, and when you're a game that you are paying for your server costs, right?
Mm,
So we're not peer to peer. We're not just hosting it off of somebody else's, console or PC somewhere else that they're paying for. You're paying for servers,
mm,
and servers are not cheap. And so when you're incurring a constant cost and you're not seeing the return on that cost, it's a death sentence. It's why like MMOs went up and down
mm,
so much back in the days. Is because if nobody's paying for those server costs, you can't sustain it. Doesn't matter if you spent all the money in development, you just can't afford to keep the servers running. So you either eat the cost and go further into debt, knowing that maybe there's a point in which you will get out of this. So Fallout 76 is a great example. That was something that for the beginning they had to eat the cost, but it was looking like the game was growing and growing and growing. So you can
mm,
predict where it would be finally successful and profitable and a good game that everybody wants to play. But you do have to have money in the bank for that to succeed. And we just didn't have money in the bank for Lawbreakers. We just didn't have the runway to say that we can eat that cost and ride it out for a few years. It
mm.
just was. I hope this is successful when it launches, and it couldn't be in that market with all of those big fish, and we were in an ocean at that point.
Yeah.
We were very tiny.
Well, so how long did you work on Lawbreakers? Was it 3 or 4
Beginning.
years?
Yeah,
Uh,
so it was like 3 to 4 years altogether to make the game. I think we were trying to hit 2 years was the ambition, but
hmm,
it was such an ambitious thing to say 2 years. If that was the case, it was, there was no studio.
yeah.
Nobody had worked on the technology. Nobody had worked together before. We were building an IP as we went, and it was building a game. We had to make a prototype. We had to make a back end. We had to make it all work at 60 frames per second, if not better. It was just so much to do. So it couldn't be 2 years. And again, though, but that's what makes it cost more money as well. The costs increased. Had to have a bigger team than we thought we would have to ship the game than we wanted to ship. So it got really expensive.
Do you think that like I don't know because it's kind of what ifs and what ifs could be anything. Like, do you think if it launched like 6 months earlier, it would have had a shot?
It would have probably done a little bit better because we wouldn't have been at the ascendancy of Fortnite.
Hmm.
Um, we wouldn't have had, uh, I think PUBG would have still been a problem for us, but it was still, I don't know. I think Fortnite kind of came in hard at that
Yeah.
point, and it took the rest of the gamers away. It gave them something really fresh to work with. I still think that ideally we wouldn't have launched with Overwatch as still being in its prime because we were too closely related to Overwatch. And the problem was this: gamers want to play with their friends.
Yeah.
And if there's a game that their friends are playing that's similar to the one that you're playing,
Hmm.
they're going to go and play wherever their friends are playing. And so, being that we were very similar to Overwatch, it was a very hard thing to compete with because it didn't matter if we were a good game, the friends were playing Overwatch.
Hmm.
And so you want to play with your friends. I see my son do that all the time. He finds games he loves to play, he wants to play them, and he goes back to playing Fortnite or Roblox or Minecraft because all of his friends are still there playing. And so he'll play the new game, but his friends won't.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what we had. And so when you have a server that's dead, and there's nobody on the server, or you try to matchmake and it takes you a long time to get there, less players return. And then at that point, if you don't have a community, you don't have a game.
How does it feel as a developer to spend 4 years on something and then I guess like when Lawbreakers releases, there's like a lot of online mockery for the game. Like I think
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
very famous YouTube video. I think it's got like 2 or 3 million views, and I think it's titled like Lawbreakers is going to be another billion-dollar franchise or something based off something that Cliffy B said, um, which I guess it is quite funny, like that one
Eh,
statement. Um,
Look, I love confidence, but
yeah.
don't get me wrong. But you learn a lesson there. Don't be cocky. Like,
Mm,
it's in the end, you cannot predict creativity. If
mm.
we could predict creativity, number one, it wouldn't be creativity. And number two, everybody here would be employed and have jobs and rolling around in the car of
That's
their
what all
dreams in
those
a house
Gen
they're
AI pricks are trying to do.
in. Right? It's just it doesn't work that way. So you just got to be humble, approach it with the idea, but also you got to be financially, you got to invest in it the right way. I think we just when you look at that, it's just made bad business decisions. Marketing didn't play out for us, and yeah,
There's
it's
a
a
lot of
great
money
game.
spent on that big fucking billboard.
I know. And the game was fun, like you said. It was actually really well reviewed. It was fun. People enjoyed it, but what do you do? There's nothing you can do about it, but it does hurt. You've
Hmm.
spent that's your time of your life that you've put into that. You put blood, sweat, and tears into something for many years, and you get to the end of it, and it just whimpers out. It's not a good feeling. And then you got to develop a thick skin with the internet. You have to develop a thick skin to be in the industry. Um,
Especially now.
Especially now, especially it's so easy to just people to take things very personal
Hmm.
and kind of use the anonymity to say really hurtful things. And so you need to develop a thick skin or you need to avoid it. I usually
Hmm.
tell a lot of my designers, I'm like, just don't read the comments. Whatever you do, just save your sanity. It's not worth reading the comments on. Um, but sometimes you need to when you're like somebody's going to have to read the comments, and that's usually me or somebody else. We're going to have to get into there because I need to know what people are saying because we're trying to fix the game, we're trying to make it better. I'm also trying to learn. I want to know what it is that didn't succeed. So the next time I come to this situation, I have information that helps make better choices. Um, it's just, it's feelings, it's emotion. And I
Hmm.
get that. And that's why I can kind of develop that thick skin because in the end, a gamer was let down. Somebody felt bad that the promise that we promised was not delivered in the way that we said it would be delivered, or it was interpreted in a different way. And it has to come out. Does it hurt? Sure. Can we learn from it? Absolutely.
Well, Cliffy B has said he wants to bring Lawbreakers back, so maybe.
And man, if he can work with Nexon and get them to agree to it, and let's see where it goes. I think in this day and age, if it launched, it would actually have done a lot better right now.
Hmm.
I think gamers on Steam at the very least are open to trying out a new experience and giving it a shot. Um,
Yeah, I
whichever
know a lot of
console.
people at the time were like, I think like it infamously launched with an Xbox One port. Do you remember? Like, well, I say, do you remember that? You worked on it. But like people on Xbox were like, well, it's gonna fail. It failed because it wasn't on Xbox. So it's like, as if, come on.
Yeah, you try. It would be amazing if we could always launch on every console. It's just in order to launch on a console, you need a set of developers that are going to port it to that console because the console comes with its own limitations, its performance issues, its memory issues. It's everything that you need to launch on that console requires a dedicated group of people to take the game and make it work. I think we were 60 people or so at Bosky, so there weren't many of us, which means that we're either making the game or we're porting the game. We can't do both simultaneously.
Yeah.
And being that we were still making the game, it can't be ported unless we hire people to port. And then hire people mean you have to spend all the money to do that. And we were obviously spending more than we needed to just make the game. So would it have been cool if we could simultaneously launch on every platform? Absolutely. But money has to come from somewhere.
There's no port to Xbox button.
Yeah, there's no port to Xbox button. There's also no make multiplayer button. As much as I would absolutely love there to be those buttons out
That would have
there.
been very useful on Shadowkey, I'm sure.
Oh man, there's a lot of games. Like I spent my career working on multiplayer games,
Yeah.
and they are a different beast.
Mm.
It's a learning process for designers who like onboard have never worked on a multiplayer game. It takes months of making the same content that you thought you understood how to make, but learning how to make it for multiplayer. It doesn't. It's not an overnight experience. It takes a lot of time.
Well, that was incredibly insightful, and I think you have a way with words that our joint associate Thaddeus Sessa also has. So I can see why you two get along so well.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you very much for joining me. Is there anything you want to say? Like, obviously, what you're working on now is super secret and cannot be discussed, but how excited are you for it to be revealed in however many years'
Oh,
time?
I'm super excited. I'm excited because not just the game that we're making, but the studio that we're making right now. We're building something that I'm excited about because we're trying to acknowledge the industry in the state that it's in right now, provide safe home for developers to grow, learn, and be the best that they can be from entry level onward. And we're all really excited about the game that we're making, which is the fun part.
And I'm very excited to find out what it is. Hopefully, not in 10 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely not in 10 years' time. A lot sooner than that.
Thank you very much.